A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 81. I am your host, Robert Zachary, along with my illustrious co-host, the man with the plan, Austin, Texas' own John Llewellyn. How's it going?
Hello. My plan is a simple one.
A plan.
A three-step plan for America.
Who had the three-step plan?
A three-step plan for Star Wars. I don't know.
Is that like a Herman Cain thing?
Oh, I don't know. It's just like a generic, like, here's
my first...
my eight point plan for healthcare or whatever.
My pleasing plan. First, identify the sick. 2, introduce them to doctors. Part 3, billing.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not here to talk about healthcare. We are here to talk about Star Wars and all of its iterations and infinite varieties. Actually, no, I will never talk about Hero Mashers, apart from talking about Hero Mashers right now.
We'll talk about how when we go to Target or whatever, it seems like no one is buying them. That's the only context in which we'll talk about them.
Will say, yeah, I could have loaded up on all the Zebs that I ever possibly needed. I was thinking about my 5 and 7-year-old nieces if they needed Hero Mashers, and they did not.
Yeah, no.
Just looking at them, I'm like, yeah, it's just gonna be like the torsos and the legs will be somewhere else. They'll be like, thanks, Uncle Robert. That was the funnest 5 minutes of toy play I've ever had. I don't think they've ever learned about making toys that like kids basically, rip them apart. And the parts go everywhere. So like, let's make a toy we can tear apart. It's like, no, they should probably make everything out of like back when my dad was a kid and everything was made out of like tin, and it had like all the wheels were like installed with bolts.
Right.
I have a Keystone, which is like one of these companies. It's I guess it was called a water truck. So I guess back in the 30s and 40s, kids loved the idea of like, you know what I want to be? I want to be a water truck. But the thing
is, love trucks.
Exactly. But it's like one of these things that's been kicking around our house for my entire life. And then I guess my dad even got it as a child, and his stepdad had like dug it out of a dump or something, and it's still around. I mean, it's like, that's the thing. And then I go look at some of the toys I had as a kid that I want to put on display, and like they're just falling apart. But again, we're not a toy podcast, so we're going to talk about a lot of there's a lot of Star Wars stuff going on. At least I think there was. It's all kind of it's not like super big news. It's like of course we had the Rebels season finale. Bob Iger, who is he's Disney. He's a CEO or CFO or one of the two. CEO of Disney. And he was going to step down, but I guess he's going on for another year. He did he gave a talk. Now is that different from that Cine something conference that's happening right now?
No, I think it was at the conference.
Okay.
It's some kind of like film/technology conference. Not the South by Southwest one, but someone one in Florida that he can go to and just get interviewed by his wife.
Who's he married to?
Willow Bay.
Oh, I don't know who that is.
She was a sports anchor for a while in like the 90s.
Okay.
And then she was like a non-sports anchor for a little while as well. And now she's the head of the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California. And that is where I should say Bob Iger was speaking, and so she interviewed him.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm sure that was very hard pressing. Asked for a lot of secrets of Star Wars or whatever.
Yeah,
but yeah, there's some other conference going on, and I saw that Peter Serretta from Slash Film was talking about, because I guess they're showing clips of the new Alien movie that's coming out, and I don't know, all those other superhero movies. There are no other movies, but Star Wars and superhero movies are animated films, so I assume they're all just, it's either Spider-Man or Robert Downey Jr. involved in this somehow.
Right.
It's kind of like that
it is mostly an animated character these days anyway.
That is true. It's like, for a guy like that, I can't believe that he goes like, I'm getting tired of playing Iron Man, because like literally all he has to do is put on like a suit and kind of they just like superimpose him into stuff. Like, what do you really want to go back to, working with actually can't go back working with Robert Altman, he's gone, but he's the one who himself said he doesn't like working on indie films anymore anyway.
Right.
Like, I don't want to stay in a Motel 6 and have to get up at 6 a.m. and make my own coffee.
Right.
Again, we're not talking about Star Wars. I will say,
or are we?
I will start the show because otherwise I'll forget. Last week I was talking a little bit about my anticipation of my copy of the Luke Abrams books complete anthology of the Ralph McQuarrie, Ralph, his sketches, his artworks, basically everything he's done for Star Wars, and a little bit before and a little bit after the movies, because I guess he kind of, from what I gather, I haven't gone through the whole book, because the reason I bring it up is it's still on sale on Amazon. So if you got the scratch, it's down to like $135 on Amazon, and you could always use the link, people, if you use our Talking Birdcast /Amazon, if you use it. But anyway, I know it's a pricey set, but it showed up on the doorstep in a box. I swear it could have been like a small refrigerator.
Yeah.
And then it was inside that box was another box and all this padding. And I'm like, wow. It's the thing was 21 pounds. 21 pounds of book. Now, we don't necessarily grade books. You okay over there?
Yeah, sorry, my pop filter for this microphone just fell over. As it often does.
He found out it was 21-pound book and he fell over.
Yeah.
He just thought, oh my God, how much would you expect
what
to
you
pay?
can't hear over this medium is the sound of my monocle popping out in disbelief.
What? The kind of Boss Tweed, like, how much? Yeah, so it's like, I know that's like books are, we've gotten to the point where we're rating the value of books by their weight, but I will just say in my defense that I'm no expert on printing, but it does seem every year like you buy these books and they get cheaper and cheaper, and your thumb will touch a page and all of a sudden you're like, there's a smear on it because the ink's, this is a really well-made book. I mean, it was printed in China, of course, which I think a lot of these books are printed, but it's high bond paper. It's got a really, really heavy stock, paper stock, or not. It's not card stock, but it's, they really went, I've flipped through the first volume because it's, like I said, it's so heavy. You kind of have to take it out in volumes and make room on the table beforehand. And I'm very, it's right now I'm very careful with it. It's like, oh, I got to take everything off, wipe the table off with a rag. So there's no thing, make sure there's no water from the rag on there. Then you open it up. So it's like, it's one of those things where you kind of have to, decide you're going to look at this book. But anyway, that being said, it is phenomenal. The high resolution. So, I mean, some of this stuff has detail went and rescanned it all. And I mean, some of this stuff is like, that you don't, it doesn't even occur to you that like, you think, oh, well, Ralph McQuarrie did, the original designs and the original things, some storyboards, but he did he painted mats for Lucasfilm. I mean, the opening shot in Tatooine is a McQuarrie painting, and they even get in and they scan like, the moons of Tatooine and some of the stuff they actually had to go back and I might be repeating myself because I think I watched a video, but they went back and actually reached out to people that over time, private collectors that had gotten pieces of this, of sketches and thumbnails. And, he had a very commercial arts way of doing things. It's like, the thumbnail, the sketch, the rough, the proofs, and then that kind of stuff. So it's a very kind of, I don't know how people do their art now. Maybe it's the same way, but it's nice to see like, this isn't just something that he was like, oh, I was just sitting around thinking and I whipped this up. It's a talent, and like with
the
people,
care and the craft that goes into this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and definitely, a guy like Doug Chang and stuff, he's definitely a in that tradition, at least I feel. He's probably more digital now. But, guys like Sid Mead and Ron Cobb, who did all that stuff for like Blade Runner and Alien. It's like, it's kind of like, well, they're a dying breed. Those guys are still around, but Ralph's gone. And anyway, so far, so good. I highly recommend at least the first half of the book. And, if you don't like it, you could use it like a kettlebell or something. Put a handle on it.
Right.
Because it's 21 pounds, but it's nice. And I also, I kind of didn't wait around for the physical copy, and I got my my iTunes copy of Rogue One last Friday, and I've been enjoying that. Been taking a lot from that. Kind of been watching. I think I've watched it every night this week or whatever. At least when I'm kind of in the back, putting it on in the background or whatnot. But I will say I'm underwhelmed by the extras. I mean, it's interesting, but it, honestly, if you've been listening to this show or any other show or reading up on it, you pretty much know all the most interesting stuff. So not that we were doing the dig, we were just kind of collecting this information that's been in the ether. But again, there's not a lot of allusions to, the fact that the movie had changed at some point. It's very much an EP. It's like there's about an hour's worth of stuff in there. And basically it's broken up into pieces by characters, like Chirrut and Baze are grouped together, and Jin and Cassian. And it's that kind of situation. It's very, very EPK. There's not, much like you were kind of lamenting last week about the forthcoming making of book. It's like, there's not any great information that you're like, oh wow, I didn't know that kind of thing. So in some ways it's a disappointment. And when the Blu-ray comes out next Tuesday, it's kind of a 1-for-1 situation where everything you got on iTunes is pretty much what you're getting on the Blu-ray. So, although I am still tempted by the idea of purchasing it, getting a 3D version of it, but that remains to be seen whether I'm going to pull the trigger and actually end up buying it again in less than a week. So, but that's where we're at with that. What should we get into now? Should we talk about this?
What should we get in? What shouldn't we get into? Yeah, so I guess let's talk about Iger.
Okay.
So he, as we talked about, he was at that kind of tech/entertainment thing. He had a lot to say. He didn't say much, but at the same time, he said a lot. So, and there are kind of three big things that came out of that, and we'll talk about them in turn. So the first is about The Last Jedi, and there had been speculation, and maybe even more than just speculation, but this idea that they were going to refilm, they were going to rewrite the script and do some reshoots because of Carrie Fisher passing away. Right, she had filmed the movie, and then she had filmed her parts, passed away, and so she clearly can't be in episode 9. So they were going to kind of rejigger episode 8 to account for that. Well, Bob Iger says that actually, no, they are not going to do that. They're going to leave all of Carrie Fisher's parts as is. They think she did a really good job. So no, we are not going to get, Milhouse sitting on the couch delivering a line, just kind of edited in to a random scene to explain, or, we're not going to get the cell of Carrie Fisher just kind of floating up into space where she says, "I have to go now."
At least not in episode 8.
Right. At least in episode 8. So we've talked about this, and we've talked about kind of what we thought, how we thought it would go with the rewrites and reshoots. But now that we know that's not going to happen, what do you think about that decision? Do you think that's the right one, or do you think then that just it's kind of kicking the can down the road and they have to make a tougher decision later on about what to do with her absence?
Well, I mean, obviously they're in a place of greater knowledge than I am. They know what her story arc was intended and how much of that was fulfilled. It does kind of make you wonder, you had sent me an email before and asked me what my take was. I guess MTV News or was it VH1? One of the two. MTV was talking.
Oh, don't mix those up, buddy.
Oh, really?
Oh, I don't know.
I thought it was just
I feel like people cared more about the difference between them, 20 years ago.
Exactly. But, yeah, I guess of all people, I should be the one more sensitive to that. But anyway.
It was MTV.
I thought
caught up with Colin Trevorrow.
Yeah, like he's very Colin Trevorrow. I don't know what to say. Every time I look at him, I kind of have this, I know it's really mean to just say things about people you don't know, but it just has this kind of look about him. I just think he's like, that kind of look.
Yeah.
Where he's like constantly, even if it's 90,
he's just kind of there.
He looks like the kind of guy that even if it's 90 degrees out, he's still wearing a tweed jacket and a scarf. But
yeah,
but again, Don't know the guy. I actually think he might be from Washington State, so I shouldn't be picking on the local boys. But
right, he's like, he gave all these platitudes about how hard he was working on episode 9.
Yeah, that's kind of
110%, and it's all consuming.
And that's kind of like, and I guess my whole thing is like it almost makes me for the first time really question, because I think that's exactly the kind of thing I say when I'm trying to BS my way through a conversation about and the fact I haven't done anything for it. But obviously he couldn't get away with not doing, his work, but he is simultaneously executive producing Jurassic World 2, which, I mean, I don't know what that really entails, but he implied that he works on Jurassic World 2 in the morning and Star Wars at night, and that he's working very hard. He's working so hard. He's giving
he's just really working hard, guys.
110%. So, I mean, in some ways, kind of thinking about this in the context, not to be picking on Colin, but that maybe there is this kind of thing. He is maybe kind of like pulling his hair out, going like, "Oh my God, they didn't fix this problem for me. I'm going to have to figure." I mean, I guess Rian Johnson technically is writing the script for episode 9, so in some ways it really is his problem. But, he has to, Colin Trevorrow has to put his name on this, so he has to be good with it and creatively or whatever. And so I honestly do think it's kind of, they probably did kick it down the way. But, jokes aside, I'm sure they probably are like, well, we're going to give you every resource you have to kind of fix this and make it satisfying. But you can't help but feel like, yeah, they're not going to do the Milhouse kind of thing or the Poochie thing, and they're going to have to come up with something. And I don't know how they're going to please people. You know what I mean? They could go CGI, which I think it would be distracting. It would be the Livia Soprano thing, the floating head syndrome, even though you've got one of the best special effects companies in the world working on this problem. People still, they just got done doing Tarkin, and people still kind of complain. I will say, just back to what I was talking before, a lot of the kind of Uncanny Valley or whatever stuff kind of gets muddied on home video where the resolution isn't as good.
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't say it's like, oh man,
How do Tarkin and Leia look on your TV?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I mean, you can definitely tell it's CGI, but it's, now you go, I guess, I mean, is film, well, you can see in the theater, I guess that's equivalent to 4K now, I thought, or maybe 8K, I don't know. And then obviously standard 1080p with the compression on iTunes or whatever, it's probably a little bit less than 1080p. And it, like I said, it like was pretty good to my eye. It's, again, I was not as hesitant to the CGI Tarkin, mainly because I feel like, Star Wars has a long tradition of pushing the technological envelope, even if it doesn't look 100% photorealistic. That's what Star Wars is. It's about technology and storytelling, but at least for me it is. But back to like Trevorrow and whatnot, I do feel like he's probably got a pretty big task, and that people, like even me, it's like I feel like a little bit, the way I'm saying it's like I'm kind of gunning for him a little bit, kind of mainly because I did not enjoy Jurassic World. I thought it was a pretty sloppy film. But again, it's a big machine, and the demands of a Jurassic World are going to be different than the demands of a Star Wars movie. It's much more of in some ways for people, a very sacred text. So I wouldn't necessarily go like out of hand blame shortcomings about that movie on him, or rather than the fact that like, this is the movie we want you to make it. You can put your style in it. I mean, I saw Safety Not Guaranteed. I enjoyed that well enough. I thought that was a good film.
I get it. I mean, your last point about Jurassic World being sloppy, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, I think that's maybe where the worry is, because in this MTV thing, it was a video, their interview, but their intro paragraph mentioned that he was working on Jurassic World 2, getting all of that taken care of and squared away for the guy directing that, while also working on episode 9. So it's like, well, if his attention is divided, and certainly, Star Wars has enough support staff, we'll say, to make sure that a lot of stuff is running smoothly, but the director is still there kind of guiding it. And so if his attention is divided at this point, like, what is that? Will that manifest itself on the screen when we actually see episode 9? About Carrie Fisher, I mean, I think it is maybe the best tribute they could do to her, to say, like, we're going to let her performance stand as is. We're not going to change it. This is the performance she gave because this is what the movie was when she made the movie. So, let's let people see that, and let's let people see the work she put in to this character and the scene she has in this movie specifically. And so, I mean, I think, like you're saying, ultimately that kind of sets up other problems down the road, right? And maybe it doesn't, because as you started out saying, they know what the episode 9 script is shaping up to be, and we don't, and they have seen episode 8 and we haven't, or the dailies or the rough cut or whatever, so they know the arc of her character, and maybe this was going to be it for her anyway. And so, they can say, no, we're not going to change anything, while also not worrying about whether they have to change anything. So, we'll find out on that. But yeah, I think just in general, letting her performance stand and letting people kind of see the work she put into it, I think that's a fitting enough tribute for any actor.
Yeah. And again, it's like, I think a lot of my anxiety, especially when he talks about like having kind of doing one movie in the morning, one at night, it's that idea that's like, man, is this really is this where Star Wars is going, where it'd be like, oh yeah, well, I'm working on Star Wars at night, rather than like this is the sum. I'm going to focus on this totally. And it's like the idea that you realize that J.J. Abrams was kind of still producing the Star Trek movie, the Star Trek Beyond, executive producing that movie,
right,
while he was simultaneously making The Force Awakens.
And that's not too uncommon. I mean, particularly, depending on what directors' schedules are like, how in demand they are, they could be, wrapping up editing and post-production on one movie while they start pre-production on their next job. I mean, that's not uncommon, but, with Trevorrow, when you do have these kind of two huge properties and you have him saying, like, I'm giving 110% and I'm working super hard, but also doing it, like, both of these things are going to take up some amount of his attention, then you're like, well, all right, maybe you could have planned this out better, or, maybe you just step away from Jurassic World and let Jurassic World 2 and let other people take care of it.
And also, it's 2017, and people can like look at rough animatics and stuff on iPads or laptops on airplanes.
Yeah,
and
true.
It's that thing where it's like, people are almost seem like they work on, when they say they're giving 110%, you almost wonder, it's like, well, maybe they are, because you can constantly be getting emails on your phone. It's not like a thing like, oh, I checked out at 5. I'm not in work, so like he could go to bed and sign off on, an actor or sign off on this. So maybe I don't understand the workflow of a Hollywood movie in 2017. It's like maybe it is kind of that idea. If you're going to be their golden child, so to speak, like JJ kind of was Disney's or whoever you're talking about, you're going to have to operate at this level of, like, yeah, you've got your gig that you're working on, and then you've got your next gig after this gig, and then you got your central gig, and you're constantly like flitting between the three or whatever. So, maybe this is indicative of nothing, but then again, you might be the thing where they go back. Remember in 2017, the teens, when every director was working on 3 movies and they all turned out to be awful. So it could be anything. I am curious. Of course, I would never want to. I have no vested interest in a Star Wars movie like sucking, so it's like, I definitely want him to succeed.
Right.
It's just, I get very like,
I want this movie to be bad, so it proves our point about.
Yeah, exactly. All these years of podcasting is just, it's my long con.
Yeah. So the Han Solo movie. Bob Iger had some interesting things to say about the Han Solo movie. He gave a little more detail about what the movie would be about. Specifically, this movie will span the time period in which Han Solo starts out 18 years old until the time he reaches 24 years old. That is probably the most awkward way I could have phrased that sentence. So the movie will span ages 18 to 24 for our young hero. It will show him getting, or at least I think he used the word finding, the Millennium Falcon. It will show him meeting Chewbacca. And it will show how he got his name, Han Solo. How he came to be known as Han Solo. The implication, of course, being that is not his name, or that is not the name he was born with, which caused, a lot of clicks. Very, that is clickbait if I ever heard it. At the same time, again, this is the movie that's going to break all the rules. Guitar solo.
Whammy.
This was been billed as a very different approach to Star Wars. So, what do you think about Han Solo not being Han Solo?
Now, again,
sorry, that was probably the most awkward I could have phrased that.
I feel
so
like
I don't feel bad that you were not prepared for that sentence to end.
I just feel like I'm climbing off of poor Colin Trevorrow's back, and I'm getting on to the backs of Lord Miller and what's his face, the son of Lawrence Kasdan. But oh man,
John.
they are that's like some prequel level type caution right there. You know what I mean? It's
right.
You know, I in some ways, you know, they have been very, you know, in the movies they've been very subtly respectful of the prequels, and even though, you know, some people would say the prequels set Star Wars back a lot,
right?
I don't agree, but the things that I do agree with is like little weird things like, oh, now, you know, Darth Vader made C-3PO, the kind of things that you wish that didn't happen in the prequels.
Right. Not everything needs to be connected to.
And the idea that Han Solo has got like some other name, and then he gets his name, and it's like this thing. So now every time we watch Han Solo, if we're going to consider this as a big story, we're going to be like, well, that's not his real name, was like Jeff Swanson or something like that, or whatever Star Wars name he would have. I mean, it would be
the Star Wars version would be like Swan Jeffson, or like
Swanson Jeffson,
son Swan Jeffs.
Oh, exactly. Or his name is Dash. He's born Dash Rendar, and then
yeah. Oh man, that would be
weird.
I would hate it, but I would respect how angry it would make so many people.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I haven't heard a single person say, "Wow, this is cool." You know what I mean? It's
everyone's reaction has been like, maybe we're not really sure what to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, but no, there hasn't been this overwhelming like, oh, thank God that they're establishing that Han Solo is like an alias or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's like that kind of thing. It's like, all right, why is it because he's going to be is it the whole point? Is he like some rich kid playing pirate, or you know what I mean? He had a famous last name, but I don't know. It's what a weird thing to tease. I honestly feel like in some ways, if you could have teased, now there's been no clarification, so I'm just going to take it at face value when he says how getting his name is his actual name, and not meaning like how he got his name in the sense of a reputation, which I guess in some semantic ways you could say.
Yeah, I thought about that.
But he never explicitly, and after people reacted, he didn't come out and clarify and say, I just meant by his reputation, not his actual name. So I'll take it on face value that it's a name situation. That's a weird thing, and be like, rather than like him coming out with like, I don't know, a card, Sabak deck or something, or the dice for the Falcon, and saying like, this is going to find out how he got the Falcon, which I feel like the people that are really into Star Wars would instantly be, you know, either excited or at least placated by it. Whereas maybe he was just kind of getting people ready for it, so they didn't walk into the theater and be like, what? But I can't imagine, because most people don't follow this kind of news. So I don't know. I mean, my point is like it's not really informative for lay people, because it's confusing. Like, what? That's not his real name. And then all of a sudden you're the Star Wars nerd in the family's getting inundated with like, well, what's his real name? And they're like, oh no, I don't know any more about this than you do. This is just.
And then later they have to be like, well, actually, you know, his real name wasn't Han Solo. It was whatever it ends up being.
Yes. And that's I mean, I had somebody come up to me the other day, and like a relative of mine, and they know about that I do this podcast, and they kind of said, so like, is Jar Jar really like a Sith Lord? Because there's like this clickbaity thing going around.
There's so much stuff out there.
There's this theory that Jar Jar Binks was a Sith Lord, and I'm just like, no. That was a joke. And so it's like that's what it just leads to misdirection. But, you know, it doesn't inform maybe new viewers. It wouldn't make people excited about it if you weren't particularly involved in this stuff, and it definitely wouldn't excite you if you're a person that spent a lot of time with Star Wars. So I don't know who you're trying to satisfy here, and it fills me with nothing but dread, because I can't think of any version of this where it like you go, yeah, at first I wasn't, and I'll be the first one to say I was wrong if they prove me wrong. It's like I'm not beyond saying I was wrong, but it's just like my first blush. Well, actually, not first blush. I've had about a week to think about this. I still think it's a bad idea. Everyone I know that we talk about this is already calls this like this could potentially be the first real crappy movie of the new era. And I mean, that's not a reason to not do. If they're artists and they have an idea and they feel strongly about it, then obviously it's our job to accept that, and at least accept that they're going to do it, and then we criticize it after we see how they've done it. But if you're asking me just as a Star Wars nerd of some sort, yeah, it just like, ugh, this is a bad idea. This is so bad. I mean, I guess we've already, after that whole Garrick Shrike thing with Woody Harrelson, we finally found out
his name's Beckett.
Beckett, which is a
Beckett.
I don't know. Is that a reference to like? I don't know. You wouldn't know because they're not telling us anything. It's like there's that.
Yeah.
Does it refer to the movie or whatever? Isn't there like a famous film called Beckett? Oh, it was a movie with it's an old movie with Richard Burton and
the 1964 dramatic film adaptation of the play Beckett,
Peter O'Toole,
or The Honor of God by Jean Ennui.
I've never seen it, so I don't know. It's
Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole.
Richard Burton.
John Gielgud.
Oh yes, John Gielgud. John Gielgud? Was he the one that was in Arthur?
I don't know.
No, that's probably too obscure. Anyway.
I wouldn't know. I'm sorry.
It's all right. But yeah. Anyway, long story. I just these names. It's not a very Star Wars name.
Well,
either.
So I mean, I think it was like was it last week or a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking about kind of Rogue One and the fact that it did reasonably well and it was reasonably good. I was like, oh, this is now maybe I'm more worried about the episode numbers, and I kind of trust that they kind of know what they're doing with these standalone movies. And now I hear this, and I'm like,
yeah.
Now I don't know what to think.
I do remember us talking like that, like, oh yeah, we should worry more about what Rian Johnson's going, and then I'm back to worrying about the Han Solo, and I'm worrying about and now I'm worrying about what Colin Trevorrow has going. So it's kind of an odd time to be a long-standing. I never thought that these movies coming out at this fast clip would be actually, give me movie anxiety or whatever, which is a way to differentiate. Like, it doesn't actually give me real anxiety in life. It's movie anxiety. It's not.
They're keeping us on their toes.
It's not keeping me, but it's not keeping me up at night, folks.
Yeah.
But it's just like, wow. They must have like a strong idea. I really hope they have they're really like, whatever. We've got a great idea. Let's just go forward and we'll prove the fans wrong. I mean, I hope that's what the behind the scenes thing. I mean, they're really good about, they've been so good about keeping a lot of this episode 8 stuff close to their vest. It's like, if there was any kind of issues, we're not going to hear about it, It's
right, exactly.
Speaking of episode 8, what was that thing about the new walkers that are coming out? I read the story.
Oh, we have big walkers now. So if all of you people who have been complaining, those AT-AT walkers are too puny. What we need, they can't crush anything. What we need is bigger walkers. Well, you are in luck, because episode 8 will have walkers that are allegedly, operating on little sleep here, are allegedly twice the size of the AT-AT walkers, and they're called like the First Order Ground Assault Walkers, I think. No, not First Order Heavy Assault Faux
Right.
is what they are. To which I said on Twitter, they missed the boat by not calling them the First Order Ground Heavy Assault Transports. I'll leave it to you all to figure out the acronym for that, as the joke is now nearly a week old. But right, so we're getting. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like they're just kind of. I mean, this really gets into the area where it's like, all right, you just kind of wanted to make more toys, right? Like, all right, you took the AT-AT, you made it a cargo thing for Rogue One, and now you're just making it bigger. I mean, maybe I'm sure there's some kind of like story reason based on the First Order, and the First Order is like, we need to be like the Empire, but everything needs to be twice as large.
Exactly.
You know, we will build a Death Star. We'll turn a planet itself into the Death Star. We won't build an AT-AT walker. We'll build it twice as big. It needs to be twice as like. Why does it need to be twice? I assume by saying twice as big, I don't know if they mean like twice as tall or like twice as wide or both. Like, is it proportionally twice as big or like the legs twice as tall? And like, why do you need the legs to be twice as tall? What does that do? Are you on a planet with like, are they invading Kashyyyk and they need to be able to walk over the trees? Like, what is happening that you need legs that are twice as tall? So it feels like they're just I mean again, prequels, I don't want to like go back and forth about this, but right, I mean, one of the interesting things about the prequels is that they kind of made new stuff. I mean, certainly by the time they got to episode 3, they were consciously like, all right, let's make some of this stuff sort of look like the stuff we saw in the original trilogy. But you know, the Naboo starfighters were not anything that we had seen in the original trilogy. The pod racers were not like anything we had seen in the original trilogy. You know, the droids, you know, were all kind of crazy and different. And I kind of like, I want more of that stuff now in the sequels. Like, I kind of like, yeah, I get that there's this like path dependence in design and all that kind of thing, but it's like, yeah, don't just take the original trilogy designs, but then like bigger, or these are black and white instead of gray, or there's a red stripe in it now. You know, it's a TIE fighter, except now there's a red stripe on it. Like, all right, you gotta give me a little more to go on. I mean, the U-wing I thought was just okay, and that definitely felt like, oh, let's make a new ship, you know, just for the sake of making a new ship, and then we can sell toys and things. But I did appreciate that while it incorporated familiar elements, there was enough that was new about it, about the way it looked. Whereas this is like, again, don't just give us the same thing but with a stripe on it, or the same thing but twice as big as it used to be. Like, that feels like, all right, you can maybe push it a little more.
Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, I know. It's just, it feels like a lack of innovation, and it's funny because it comes back to like when you watch. I guess this is kind of the problem that they have. It's like, how far out can they go? It's, you know, we haven't even gotten it would have been kind of like, you know, we haven't seen anything. I haven't seen, but maybe some promotional images that may or may not be production. They're just paintings of Rey and her costume. So that's about all we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't look at the sketch. I mean, I think there was a sketch up of this thing, and somebody had said something like, what did they say? Something like it was a gorilla or something like that.
Oh yeah,
it was some kind of like, it looked like an animal. I don't know. I didn't read it.
Right, which I mean, that, you know, the AT-AT walkers were made to move like elephants, and you know, you have the chicken walkers and all that. So is
that kind of like, they mean like the big arms where the arms are strong and then they
right.
kind of swing the undercarriage forward and then do the arms, kind of like, you know, like a cartoon gorilla.
Right.
But, you know, even in the Rogue One stuff, you know, Doug Chiang was, you know, talking about, you know, working up designs for stuff and kind of going like, well, then we had to go back to the well, which was our Ralph McQuarrie drawings. And it's kind of like amazing that, like, you know, well, obviously Rogue One, because it was takes place before A New Hope, so it's germane to that. But it's like, you've got that, and you've got Rebels that dip, heavily into his stuff. But it's like, I feel like even the new ones seem to be almost, not explicitly dipping into his ideas still. It's like, kind of like you said, it's like, wow, the First Order stormtroopers actually look a bit more like the way Ralph McQuarrie had actually kind of envisioned the stormtroopers. Like, you see one of the shots where early on, like, all stormtroopers had a lightsaber and, they had shields. And then now you have the guy, whoever in The Force Awakens, which I guess he's colloquially known as Traitor. Like, he's the First Order one who calls out Finn. Which somebody actually explained to me that in the teen novel Before the Awakening, him and Finn actually have a relationship that I didn't know about. So that's one of the books I skipped. But I mean, the fact that they're still dipping in that well, it's like, there has to be some people there that, even Doug Chiang, I mean, I'm sure he's got tons of ideas that aren't Ralph McQuarrie drawings. It's like, but maybe they think if they change it too much, people will just be like, if you start to go away from the kind of the house style, then you might uncomfortably get to like looking like other things. It's like, I haven't really looked much into, was it Valerian, that one? Is it Luc Besson that's involved in that? I don't know.
Yep, it is.
Well, and you had
it is indeed. And I went and saw Fifth Element last week, so I'm super ready for Valerian again. Okay.
But I mean, the idea that like a lot of some of those ideas, maybe not design wise, was cribbed, but I feel like sometimes you can only design so many spaceships, and and they're trying to tell it's that whole idea of like, well, we show you little things and your brain tends to fill in the holes. It's that where you go like, okay, well, my point is, if their design gets too far out there, then it might be like that doesn't feel like Star Wars. So they're almost in some strange way locked into the McQuarrie kind of idea, even when you have a guy like Doug Chiang doing, the art for these things. He has to constantly go back to that well for ideas. Otherwise, people's takeaway is like, this doesn't look like Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. But to return to something you said earlier, I mean, even with The Force Awakens, the Art of Force Awakens book, the beginning concepts before there was even a director or anything are really interesting, because they're just, okay, the designers, the concept artist is kind of like draw some Star Wars stuff and, just kind of see what it looks like. And then once J.J. Abrams got in there, like, all right, so now we have to draw a bunch of TIE fighters, and like, we have to, let's see how we can update this TIE design and put that, eyeball cockpit on a couple different configurations, or, okay, well, let's design some new stormtrooper armor because we know that that's going to be a thing, right? And so, I mean, I talked about, I think it was last week, kind of the safe creative choices that J.J. Abrams made, and I think that is really going to influence the rest of the trilogy, right? That isn't going to be isolated to The Force Awakens. I mean, I do take your point, though, that it can't be too far afield, otherwise it starts looking like some other, it starts looking like Star Trek or Blade Runner or The Fifth Element, some other kind of concrete science fiction entity, or it just looks like completely off the wall and crazy, and you as a viewer, it doesn't match up with what you expect Star Wars to look like. And so I mean, I still do think, given how far they push stuff with the prequels, I still think there's a lot of room that they could go to push some of these designs for the sequels a little bit. And I don't know, maybe we'll see them in other places than these huge walkers, but that remains to be seen, which is the cop-out way of ending that sentence.
Well, I mean, again, we don't know how much these things are. It's like, it's that kind of that peak Star Wars kind of thing. Like, you get enough where excites the brain, but it doesn't belabor. It's like people had talked a lot about in Rogue One that Juggernaut tank from the Clone Wars shows up. I think it's actually in episode 3, and how excited people were to have, there's that one shot where Jyn is actually inside a kind of a mobile detention thing, and it's definitely an old leftover Clone Wars vehicle, and people, it's just like one shot. It's like, I would actually say it's probably shorter than the shot of the Jawa Sandcrawler, and people are still talking how excited they were to have that kind of nod. So it's that kind of thing where it's that less is more philosophy. It's like, well, if we give you have to have the rough shape of things, it becomes, then people go, okay, that's thing again. If it's like everything looked like all of a sudden their spaceships look like puffer fishes attacking, people are going to be like, what the heck is that? Even though that would be really cool, and I'd love to watch a sci-fi movie with huge pufferfish spaceships and stuff. Maybe I would come back and go, well, it didn't feel like Star Wars, and I'm kind of, I'm asking for variety, but then again, when I'm being provided with it, it's like even now I complain on other episodes like that I don't really like the First Order Stormtroopers. Like I just don't like they actually, it's like the Stormtroopers themselves are all right, but as they venture on, it's like the Flame Trooper looks, I don't like the Flame Trooper, and the Snow Trooper looks, I'm like, in retrospect, I'm like, I really don't like those Stormtroopers.
They look a little, I mean, I kind of like them, but I also think they look a little bit like Cobra.
Yeah, I think that's kind of my thing. It's like those ones especially. But then again, when this movie comes out, when Episode 8 comes out, I'm like, I'm gonna want to see like, well, what Stormtroopers, because they've always introduced one or two
what's the new Stormtrooper? What's the new ship? What's the new Imperial Walker or First Order Walker?
So in some ways, they know what you want better than even what you know what you want. It's like you wanted this. You wanted this 8, super tall thing that runs like a gorilla because it kind of looks like an AT-AT.
Right.
It's like, okay. So it's,
yeah.
I complain, but then again, what would when confronted with newness, would I just complain some more?
Yeah. I'm the same way. I'm right with you. And speaking of knowing what we want and giving us what we want before we know that's what we want, the last kind of tidbit that Iger dropped, the last little morsel that he
a little wafer thin information.
Yeah, exactly. So he said that Disney, he just said we. So either Disney, Lucasfilm, Story Group, whoever you want to include in there, is looking at, quote, what could be another decade and a half of Star Wars stories. So if the current pace holds, that is another 15 movies, potentially. Now, previously he said like they're just going to keep making them until it stops being viable. We'll keep making these movies as long as people keep going to see them. And I should know the caveat, what could be. So they very well could not be. Are you ready for another decade and a half of Star Wars movies, buddy?
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like this is turning into be a weird episode because it's like we're a Star Wars podcast
my mood isn't helping.
But we're a Star Wars podcast that we don't know if we're too hot about all this Star Wars stuff coming. But I mean, It's the thing. I'll tell people why this is the thing. It's like it's the day it stops being special. It's going to be kind of like a bummer. And I always worried about that when they were like, oh my God, there's a Star Wars movie every year. It's like, when is this going to stop being special? And that's my thing. It's like when you get to be like, okay, we're doing a fourth trilogy and we're going to, probably will reboot it. They'll do it kind of like, well, I mean, look what a mess that people have made of like the X-Men universe. And there's some good movies in there, but there's only one or two. Actually, I would only say one true classic in that franchise. It's like, I just don't want Star Wars to become like one of these things where it becomes so muddied that they just openly have to like contradict the movies to kind of keep it exciting, which is kind of what the X-Men movies have had to do, because they keep creating like these problems that they can't really solve without like making whole movies about it.
Right.
And the, Bob Iger, he, they're happy with him, so he signed on. He's going to be at the forefront till like mid 2019 or something like that. And he was actually supposed to be stepping down this year, but they extended his contract.
Right, but then I think he's at least one more year. Is that right, or 2 years?
It's mid. I looked it up. It's mid 2019. So he's actually going to be shepherding.
2 more years.
He's going to be shepherding this all the way to the end of the saga.
I guess, yeah. Episode 9 will probably be.
That's episode 9.
The last one released under his watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's still slated for Christmas of 2019. So yeah, he'll probably like sign off on that one. So they'll have another person in there, and probably, as much as we're thinking that there's going to be another decade and a half, there's going to be another person in there, and it could be any. It'd be interesting if it's like, it might end up being Kathy Kennedy. And so, yeah, then we would have, someone kind of from within the Star Wars organization running all of Disney and Marvel and all that stuff. And in some ways, yeah, it would be a nice continuity to you'd have someone that's like, at least they've kind of proven that they care about this thing and that they don't want to mess it up. Or you could get somebody in, I don't want to use any names, but I love to watch these YouTube videos where there's this guy out, I forget their name, but they do like kind of Hollywood insider videos of like, oh, here's all the rumors why, Josh Trank got in trouble in the Fantastic Four. And it's like, but they talk a lot about when these people come in, they kind of jump in on a studio, they kind of have their own ideas of how they want to do things, and they get more experimental, and they don't necessarily want to do things the way the guy previously did. So then they get very like, they make these rash decisions, and that would be my concern. It's like, oh, we're just gonna make one. We're gonna make a cartoon that has a live action sequel, or what I mean. If they start crossing the streams of that kind of thing, where it just becomes like, well, we're getting as much product out there. It's like, or are we going to have one-off movies with characters from, this trilogy? It's like, oh, we're going to do a one-off movie with the, John Boyega and Daisy Ridley, and it's like, and it's done.
Where's that Zeb movie everyone's been clamoring for?
Exactly. I mean, some people have said.
Because they've already announced. So sorry, they've already announced, I think, or it's heavily rumored or heavily known that there's going to be another animated series coming out at some point, and the rumor is that they'll give more detail about that at Celebration. But I mean, maybe they add a third, and maybe there's like a live action show that they finally figure out how to do, and so yeah, it could be that given how pervasive Marvel has kind of become with the multiple Netflix shows and the TV show, the comic books are all still going, obviously, and regenerating themselves. And you have a movie just about every year. Some years you'll have a couple of movies. I mean, if that's, I don't know what it'll be, how it will be if that's kind of what Star Wars becomes. Because even as kind of pervasive in the culture as Star Wars is, and as critical, people who aren't that into Star Wars, as critical as they can be of like, oh great, Star Wars, we got another Star Wars every year, like, it's still, we still get less Star Wars in a given year than we get Marvel superheroes at this point.
That is true.
So they're still like, they haven't reached the ceiling of how much Star Wars, at least movies and TV shows we could get. Certainly not, all of that kind of stuff. They certainly could pile more and more up if they really want to. And the question is, will they want to? And I think for Iger, stepping down in 2019, I think this is the next year or so is where, he and Kathleen Kennedy are going to kind of figure that out. what he wants to hand off to the next person, whether that's her, has been pretty widely rumored, or if it's someone else.
Kevin Feige or
something. He's going to be handing off. What's that? Yeah,
Kevin Feige, who does the Marvel stuff.
Yeah. He's going to be handing off both the Marvel and the Star Wars kind of franchises. Marvel, it seems like it's been going long enough now. They kind of figured out what their plans are for, past 2019. But Star Wars, at least publicly, they haven't announced. But it seems like they're still figuring out. Okay, so what are the next steps we take? How do we develop this into a long-term plan? And so that's where we'll see it. And so there's kind of, for Iger, I would imagine there's kind of his legacy. What is the Disney that he leaves to his successor, and how pervasive is all this Star Wars stuff? How pervasive is all this Marvel stuff? So, we could very well see he could decide I think we're going to continue to grow this Disney property, grow Star Wars as a Disney property, and put out more content and put out more, create TV shows and more animated shows and like you said, more spin-offs of things where it's, let's look at, John Boyega's, we'll give John Boyega a movie post episode 10, but it's just him and what he's doing, or we'll give, we'll create a Sabine and the Mandalorian TV show that's kind of like Game of Thrones, or they could go in a lot of different directions. And I mean, if it as weird as it feels to say, sorry again, I'm operating on less than optimal sleep, so my words are getting confused in my head. But as weird as it feels to say, you could almost argue that they've been working with restraint.
Yeah,
that we haven't just been completely inundated. And honestly, there are times where it does feel like we're getting inundated with here are all these books for young readers that tell the backstory of Baze and Chirrut that you should be reading if you want to hear. There are times where it can feel that way, but in other ways, it's really not to that point. There's still so much more they could be doing, and they're not. So to your point, right? Do we have this fear that well, maybe we will get to that point, and what does that look like? And it's probably not going to look great.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that they could do, and it looks like they might already be kind of moved in that direction, is that there's different levels. People can at different ages can engage in this stuff. They have Star Wars. They have the Lego Freemaker Adventures, which is something that I don't know anything about. I have no interest. I won't. It's just I don't. I'm not really into this whole idea of Legos with stories and whatnot. So it's they more and more it might be that kind of thing where they're there'll be a cartoon, but it's it's not really canon, and it might have some of your favorite characters in it, but it's done in kind of a light style where they don't have to it's a based for 6 and 7 year olds, but it's during the the Rebellion era, so it's between A New Hope and Empire, but it's it's that era, so all the characters look like they did in that movie. But if you watch it, you'll be this is not essential viewing for grown-ups. This is for kids, and the stories are kind of little one-offs. I mean, I can kind of see them doing that. They have the animated, I think the animated Guardians of the Galaxy that shows on. I think there's one version of Guardians of the Galaxy that's just a cartoon that has no bearing from the movie, and then there's a version that has a connection to the movies, that kind of stuff, You there? And you're not?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was okay. No, I'm here. That kind of thing where it's a different levels of engagement where you're just kind of well, we're not going to take this as seriously as part of the grand umbrella of Star Wars, but we're they're still going to make a good product. In some ways, the way Clone Wars was, where I never felt Clone Wars kind of came into prominence in a time where I had kind of disengaged from Star Wars, so definitely, and it definitely wasn't a thing that made me want to go, oh, well, they're doing a cartoon, I'm going to definitely get back into Star Wars because of that, Right. Whereas, we're watching Rebels, which we're going to talk about the season finale here pretty soon. it's like in some ways there is a kind of, they've made a big effort to have enough stuff in there for quote grown-ups to enjoy, but in a lot of ways that it's made for kids, it's made for tweens to engage with, and that's because that's why some of the reasons it's not as edgy as like say Rogue One or whatnot, but I think that's the future, where they have different, because if they're spending billions on putting this Star Wars stuff in their parks, it's like it behooves them to keep the Star Wars fire burning, because I doubt they want to run around and try to find another franchise that people will engage with, that like something that we're gonna have to build some franchise, like. Again, it's kind of like that weird thing where it's like, well, why is Disney invested so much in Avatar?
Right.
Where it's like, okay, Avatar World's actually going to be shown. They're actually physically built the world of Avatar before James Cameron could even get a sequel done. And I feel like that's going to be so where something like that is kind of an unknown quantity. Star Wars, as long as they don't completely screw it up, they could just completely like. Keep redoing it and approaching it at different age levels. Like I said, get the kids, get the preschoolers into Star Wars, and they have their thing, and then the junior high, and then I feel like in a lot of ways the only people that are kind of might be SOL at the end is probably like people that have been with Star Wars their whole life and have enjoyed it, and varying degrees. It's like all of a sudden they'll be like, I used to keep up with all this, but I can't keep up with the the Hero Mashers cartoon or whatever, whatever version. But on a business plan, if the kids are buying it, they're going to buy it. If it's a thing where it's like, it's a very simple story, therefore we can sell it to foreign markets without very little translation. You just redo the voices, and it's like kind of a again, that's the downside. Is I feel like eventually this stuff is not going to feel very special. It's gonna, you're rarely going to have people kind of, lining up and, I don't know. It's like, it almost makes me wonder if that's, Celebration, that they're not doing one 2018 is kind of like their stopgap measure to kind of, they don't want to hasten that potential problem that fans might be like, all right, this is starting to not feel very special anymore. I feel like maybe that's their, they've already committed to the movies. And in one of the interviews they had talked about this, 15-year plan or whatever, that, they do not announce movies unless they are completely 100% sure that they're going to make them. So they don't want,
right.
Although they did have to...
They don't like float trial balloons about like, well, maybe we'll...
Right, but even
make a Boba Fett movie.
I guess they had...
maybe that's a bad example.
They never said Boba Fett, though. Yeah, they did kind of say an unnamed movie, and we still... And I guess Simon Kinberg's still working on that, but again... That being said, I think we probably should move on to Rebels.
Yeah, speaking of...
ancillary materials.
Well, or things we like, right? We like this show in general.
Yeah.
We haven't always really figured out what they were doing this season, but we got the season finale, the season 3 finale of Rebels this past weekend. It was a double episode. It was actually 2 episodes technically. So a lot happens. I don't want to spend a ton of time like running through the plot, but just for those of you who haven't seen it, aren't going to watch it, and want to hear the plot just briefly, or if you watched it and need a refresher. Right. So you have the Ghost crew who's on Atalon Chopper base, and then we've found out, are kind of planning on this attack on Lothal to try to kind of liberate Lothal from the Empire. So Thrawn shows up on Lothal. Callus, who is, Agent Callus of the Empire, but he's also the rebel agent Fulcrum. So he uses his mouse droid to eavesdrop on the conversation between Thrawn, Governor Price of Lothal, and then Tarkin via hologram. Thrawn says he believes that Phoenix Squadron is about to attack the TIE Defender factory on Lothal with reinforcements from General Dodonna's fleet, who showed up a couple episodes ago. Governor Price says a coordinated attack by multiple rebel cells is unprecedented. So that's kind of where we are in the timeline of the galaxy here. Thrawn wants to just wipe them out. Tarkin wants the rebel leaders captured to kind of figure out more who they are and all that. We got a conversation between Ezra and Kanan about how Ezra helped inspire the planned liberation of Lothal. Kanan says, "Oh, I don't think I have anything more I can teach you." And Ezra says, "Oh, you can still teach me about life." Callus takes a speeder bike on Lothal out to, I think, the comms tower where Ezra used to live. Try to send us a message as Fulcrum, but it's immediately jammed. Turns out Thrawn followed him there. Of course, Thrawn knew that Callus was Fulcrum. There's a brief fist fight. Callus is imprisoned. Thrawn is able to triangulate Fulcrum's transmission with General Dodonna's fleet trajectory to figure out where Attilan is, even though it's not on Imperial charts. It is represented in the art of the ancient people of that sector. So there's where Thrawn's art appreciation actually
gets used.
We see that being used strategically.
His art appreciation degree finally paid off.
Yeah, exactly. His art history, his MFA in art history. Right. So the rebels receive Fulcrum's abbreviated transmission. All it says is Thrawn knows, and they're like, "Oh, well, he must know where we are. We gotta get out of here." Hera gives the evacuation order, but just as she does that, of course, Thrawn and the Empire arrive. The frigates actually jump to hyperspace, but they're pulled out by one of the interdictors that I think we saw in season 2.
Yeah.
Either very early season 3 or season 2. So Hera tells Ezra and Kanan to take Maul's old ship that Ezra brought back from Tatooine to get through the blockade to get reinforcements. Kanan has another idea. He goes to find the Bendu while Ezra leaves. Ezra goes to find Mon Mothma. She declines to send ships to help Attilan because doing so she thinks would play into Thrawn's hands. So then Ezra goes to I can't remember the name of the planet, but she goes to Sabine and her family. Meanwhile, the Phoenix Squadron and General Dodonna's ships are getting carved up by the Star Destroyers. There are like 5 of them. They carve up these ships. Sato tells his crew to abandon ship while he takes the carrier. He kind of, in a move not unlike what the Hammerhead did in Rogue One, right? Sato is basically going to try to ram one of the interdictor. Constantine moves the interdictor to intercept, even though Thrawn told him to hold. Sato uses the carrier to split the interdictor right down the middle, lengthwise. So that gets rid of that gravity well projector. Meanwhile, Hera and the remainder of the ships return to the base, but Thrawn, the Star Destroyers, keep bombarding the planet with laser cannons, and then Thrawn himself, he stops bombarding the planet just as their base shield that they recovered from Geonosis is about to overheat. But then he takes ground forces, including those AT-ATs we love so much, down to the planet. Meanwhile, Kanan is meeting with the Bendu and calls the Bendu a coward because he won't get involved, because Bendu says, "I'm the one in the middle, neither light nor dark." So he calls Bendu a coward. Bendu gets super angry and then just disappears. Let's see. Ezra convinces Sabine to help them. She has a plan to get rid of the remaining interdictor. There's the ground assault. The Mandalorian fighters show up just as the base shield goes down. There's this kind of Moonraker style battle with, Ezra in one of those like bubble dome space helmets, even where Ezra and the Mandalorians are like running across the surface of the ship to try to take out the interdictor, the gravity well projector, with like laser gun, their hand laser. I don't know what the right word for that. So then you have this fight between them and the stormtroopers, or space troopers, perhaps, like on the hull of this ship in outer space. They blow up the gravity well projector just around the same time as Hera, Kanan, Rex, Zeb, and General Dodonna are surrounded by Thrawn and his death troopers that he brought with him. Things are looking bad, but the Bendu manifests as this kind of lightning storm. And yes, with you can kind of see his face, the cloud shaped kind of like his face. So there's lightning storm destroys both Imperials and Rebels. Most of the remaining Rebels evacuate. Callus is still... He has been imprisoned, but he's able to break free. He escapes. The Ghost picks up his escape pod. They all jump to hyperspace. So at least the main Ghost crew, many of Phoenix Squadron, some of Dodonna's fleet are able to escape. It sounds like they're going to Yavin. There's sort of like a postscript with this encounter between Thrawn and the Bendu. Right, so Thrawn, once he figured out that this lightning was taking him out, he instructed all of the AT-ATs to basically fire in the center of the lightning storm, the clouds, which then you see this kind of figure falling to Earth. It's the Bendu. So he walks up to the Bendu. The Bendu is clearly dying. He says he sees Thrawn's defeat, like a cold embrace. So then Thrawn just shoots Bendu in the head, and the Bendu disappears. Then at the end, there's a really nice sequence. I guess this is even more of a postscript. There's a really nice sequence at the end where you see Kanan walking through the Ghost with, wounded rebel soldiers, and he chats with Hera. He, says a word to Zeb, whatever. And you have this kind of tracking shot. The camera's kind of following him. It's been done several times. One of the most famous examples of this would be that shot in Goodfellas. Although in this case, on Rebels, there are some edits, so it's not one continuous shot. But you get that same sense of like you're following Kanan walking through the ship, kind of seeing the aftermath, seeing how it's affected everyone. Ultimately, Kanan finds Ezra, who's sitting in the gun turret, and I can't remember who says this now. I wrote it down, but the line is, "I've seen a future for us, one where we're all free, but it's up to us to make it happen." And that is the final line of season 3 of Rebels. So that was the show. I only managed to talk about, to summarize the episode, for 40 minutes. So what did you think of this finale, Robert?
I think it was pretty good. I mean, it's definitely germane to the way the story they've been kind of telling. It's definitely not a final kind of story. Thrawn is still around. He's still a problem. Right. I think they had some issues that they had to deal with post Rogue One in some of the things that were established, because like I said, they're still trying to very much make this like kind of a prestige kind of show that if you like the movies, if you're like going to go to one, even if you're like, I don't want to read the books, you might get something from the cartoon. And I think that they've been very good about that. That being said, it's like, again, this battle was cool, but it got blunted by how great the battle from Rogue One was. It's like almost they were, except for the issue with the Bendu and having, it be Thrawn, his kind of, the idea that it's a match of wits or whatever. It is in some ways very similar to Rogue One in the fact that initially the battle is started with a very small group and thinking that it's almost a suicide mission or this is a last stand. And then at the last second you find, they get a respite in the fact that the Mandalorians come, whereas in Rogue One, it's obviously the Rebel fleet. So they kind of, and you kind of know that they weren't going to quote win, because it's like they basically, Rogue One is the first time they win. So I was kind of prepared for like maybe losing some characters or something, but that did not come to pass.
I really wondered at the end. I was like, all right, so who is going to die?
Yeah,
but then it turned out no one died, and Filoni talked about that a little bit too, but we can.
I mean, I guess it was a little. It was a little disappointing compared to how, monumental the end of season 2 was with Vader, and was Vader the? I'm sorry, was that Vader? Oh God, now I'm blanking on her name. Ahsoka, was that was at the end of season 2, right?
Yeah,
with the
that was the last.
All of a sudden, I started saying that, and I had this vision of the Sith Lord, the Sith Inquisitors with their helicopter lightsabers, and I'm thinking they didn't put Vader in that same episode, but they did. And again, that wasn't explicitly played out that Ahsoka's gone or not, but it also had a lot of gravitas to it. And I feel like, again, this was kind of below that, where I feel like a lot of that kind of mystical prophecy energy kind of, I don't even know how to describe it, but the fact that it was like that it tied into a bigger story of like Jedi versus Sith, it didn't, I know they tried to kind of play lip service with that, with the Bendu, and Kanan trying to convince the Bendu to fight for them and all this, but in some ways I felt like, well, it didn't really pay off in the way I thought, because it's like they're almost like trying to, like, the narrative's trying to like make Bendu something that he's not. Which, like, he's basically, I'm Burl Ives, I'm Mr. In-Between on this. It's like, don't ask me to come and fight your battles. And they've said that, like, he said that on 3 occasions. I mean, every time he'd show up, he'd basically go, yeah, I'm in the middle. I keep the middle. So in a lot of ways, even though he comes and fights, but it's really more of he's just trying to protect his, in some ways, he's trying to protect his impartiality. He's under direct threat, so he responds. It's not a thing where all of a sudden Kanan, it's like, it kind of shows like this weird thing where, like, why did they make, if Kanan's supposed to be getting wiser as he gets older, why would he go in and make this weird emotional appeal to someone who's basically, at least the way I'm taking away, like, when you're in that complete center, it's like, I thought they were trying to establish that the Bendu was almost on a higher plane. Like, this is where you want to be, kind of thing. And then, like, Kanan is like, no, you've got to pick a side. And he's like, no, I don't need to pick a side. So that felt like some wasted energy in the fact that they were trying to find a way to tie Bendu into all of this. But I actually think that energy might have been better used to kind of bring the Sabine thing, even though she does show up. But it's like that thing where it's like, all right, we left Sabine and we basically established, she is going to try to figure out what's going on Mandalore and who's worthy to carry the Darksaber, blah, blah, blah. And then we just go away for a week and we come back and it's like, that's like, we kind of said goodbye to her and now she's back. And I kind of think as much as
I think I don't know that she'll be around forever. I have my own suspicions that we'll see more of the Mandalorian story in season 4. I think that's one of the directions they're going to take it, based on previous things that Filoni has said. And I don't think she's going to be rejoining the Ghost Crew, but I think it was a nice thing. Like, hey, she's been a part of this. There's a line in the episode about like, it's great to have the family back together. But for how long, basically? And she is a part of this crew. If we're going to have this big episode, it makes sense to have her.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that energy they spent on the Bendu could have been spent on kind of establishing why she would come back so fast. Or maybe they could do, like, the fact that, this could be the thing. I mean, I forget. Does she have the Darksaber in the battle?
Yeah, not that I remember.
There's so much stuff going on, I forget. But
yeah,
it might have.
I mean, she does say, basically, she agrees to do it, and she says, you owe me.
Yeah.
Like, I expect this to be reciprocated, which is another indication that they'll we'll see more of her next season.
Yeah, and I just thought it might have been interesting of a way to kind of like move her a little bit more forward in this. I mean, I kind of would like to see her, rise up and kind of, because that, again, it's that whole line when she gets the Darksaber a couple episodes ago, and she immediately demurs that, I'm not worthy.
Right.
Like, she never considers that she might be what her people need. Like, I kind of would have been interesting for them to have tied that into like, no, you really are. Yes, it's the person that actually should be running things is the first person to say, I don't want to run things. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I thought maybe I'm thinking like too big of a narrative arc and maybe he wanted to leave some meat on the bone for season 4, but, maybe I'm asking too much. But no, I think it was overall, there was some great tension when they're getting the planetary shield up, or I guess it wasn't a planet, it was a base shield. Yeah. Whether or not it was going to like work and then it overheats and then they don't need it, and it's like, there's some good tension. It was very much in kind of that, in the tradition of you know, Empire Strikes Back. I mean, again, like these battles are great. You know, the bar has definitely been raised in Star Wars of what we expect. You know, after Rogue One, it's going to be really hard to go. But even with Rogue One now, it's really hard to go back to look at like what's going on in Return of the Jedi and like the Ewok battle, where you're just like, wow, this is really small, and it's like this is supposed to be the battle that was the deciding thing for everything, and it's like, oh, there's like little teddy bears running around throwing rocks, and you know, there's only seems to be about 15 rebels on the, you know, fighting in the forest. So again, this battle is another, it's like it has a big scale, so it's, yeah, I mean, I liked it, but again, having this having that Obi-Wan kind of Maul thing, which had a very kind of, obviously a very final thing to it, it felt like the big emotional stuff kind of happened the previous episode. Yeah, it's like, well, okay, but again, and then you here in the notes, you were talking that kind of, how did Hera? She just refer to him as? Did she say like, "Come back to me, love," or something?
Or yeah, she just referred to him as she could like, oh, love.
It's kind of,
like you said, like, oh, make sure you come back, love, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I took that more explicitly as the fact that they are showing that they're in a relationship of some sort. You know?
I mean, I think that was at least the first verbal confirmation we've gotten that, like, no, they're a couple. Basically. Yeah,
I mean, especially,
you know, they've kind of hinted at like, well, we're a family, and they certainly care about each other a lot. But I think this was the first time that like their feelings were explicitly stated that way.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, again, it's almost a nice tie-in to the ending of season 2, where he comes back and he's lost his sight, he's been maimed, and the way she kind of embraces him, and so it does kind of like, I mean, again, it's a cartoon. I don't know how deep into relationship stuff that they're actually going to be able to do on this show without kind of boring people, but it was a nice touch. What else?
Yeah.
Again,
I will say sorry, go ahead.
No, you've got a point.
Well, I was going to say on the Bendu thing, I actually kind of appreciated that they're like, no, he is in the middle, and I did like the kind of animation on the clouds and the lightning storm. I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty out there for a Star Wars thing to do. Right? Like, I can't imagine J.J. Abrams or Gareth Edwards coming up with like, no, why don't we have this like lightning storm that's a person, or you know, some kind of forest creature turns into a lightning storm and starts directing lightning to, you know, take out this AT-AT or whatever. And obviously, being an animation, you're kind of freer with some of those ideas. But I did think it was interesting that I think the Bendu at one point explicitly said, you know, to Kanan, he was basically like, look, maybe the Jedi were supposed to die out, right? You know, because you all were pretty dumb. There's no reason to think that the Jedi are always supposed to exist. There's nothing aside from your own belief that says like you are in the right here, that you should be around forever. Which I don't know that this will kind of explicitly tie in with the Afra comic and you know, the turnover and all that, but I think there's maybe I'll be interested to see if there are any echoes of that there.
Ooh, it'd be nice if they ran into the Bendu on the Dr. Afra comic.
That is possible, I suppose. Well, yeah.
It wouldn't pollute. They're not working in the...
It would be post-Rebels, right? Bendu post-Rebels.
Yeah,
they're between...
We don't know if he's stuck on that planet or not. I mean, I like...
Right, or he just, you know, he comes back as a Blue Force ghost or whatever. But you know, so I thought that was interesting that they put that in there. I thought it was a nice kind of resolution to the arc of the Bendu's character in this season. You know, but you're right, there's kind of like a lot to keep track of, and there's kind of like a big scope to this, a big feel to this battle. I don't know what they would call it, the Battle of Atollon. And having the Bendu do what he did, I think, kind of reinforces that or elevates it in certain ways. but yeah, I like the episode. I thought it was a nice kind of way to bring together some of the threads that they've had, I guess, throughout this whole season. To be honest, I don't remember a ton from before they took that break. Like, I don't remember what was before the break and what was after the break. I guess I know the Bendu was from before the break, but
so did you? Let me ask you this. So do you think that Thrawn actually shot the Bendu, or he shot him and he disappeared simultaneously?
That's a good question. I guess only Thrawn and those Death Troopers know.
Because I feel that he disappeared before the shot, and that he's not gone at all. It wasn't
like as the shot happened.
Yeah, he didn't kill him and then he disappeared. I think he disappeared before he shot him, or instantaneously.
No, that very well could be. Yeah,
and that he's not either. I don't know if he's going to come back, but I definitely don't feel that he died. You know what I mean? I feel like that's right. I mean, I do agree. I like this kind of almost. This is the one thing that is kind of fun about Rebels, especially with this Bendu stuff, is that there's not a lot of supernatural stuff in Star Wars, and it's kind of funny because it is science. You know, they've always told you, it's science, not science fiction, it's science fantasy. You know, it's no, there's noise in space and blah blah blah, but in some ways they're getting down to the fact where they're getting like, they talk about the vacuum of space in Rogue One or whatever, but now it's like, it's this idea that like it could be a bit more kind of, Hodorowski or whatever. I don't even know if that's a proper, but it's like a little bit of taste of Hodorowski in Star Wars is always, that's what's great about being able to have mixed media or multiple stories to tell, and you could do it in a comic book or whatever, but having it done in animation there is a certain kind of like, again, I like that. I enjoyed the cloud thing too. It was, like I said, it was a nice touch, and maybe that's they do kind of, I guess they hinted in that some of the Clone Wars stuff with, was the Mortis trilogy, I guess. Is that the one, or whatever, the one where Leota kind of confronts, Darth, God,
that's not Mortis.
No, that's the
Mortis
later
was
one.
The one where like,
I don't know the Mortis one as well. I'm thinking of the one where is it Darth Bane shows up? And Mark Hamill actually Mark Hamill does the voice. It's on. You might not have seen it because it's on the it's like a Netflix exclusive. It's like the 6 episodes they finished. But I will say that I watched the Rebels Recon, and I thought of you because he basically admitted like, this has really been an opportunity for me to finish the Clone Wars.
Yeah,
right.
Like, he says, and this has been my stalwart the whole time. He basically says, "Well, I didn't intend to do it. I always wanted me to separate, but it's nice to be able to finish that off."
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, and I think as much as we've kind of lamented that in some ways, well, at least he's being honest about it now. It's like, he had to try to like coy about it because he's like, why are you referencing a show that got canceled?
Why do you keep bringing Hondo back?
Right. Well, yeah, I think we're still gonna see a lot of Hondo. I can't remember.
I think he'll be. I mean, because other like sitcoms or other shows do this too, where they have like a recurring character who shows up for one episode a season, and The Simpsons did this for a while with Sideshow Bob. There would be a Sideshow Bob episode every season, or I'm trying to think of another example.
Well, Q on Star Trek: The Next Generation, he would show up and
it's like, okay, this is the blah episode this season, and so I think Hondo is going to be one of those.
What an odd pick for that, but I mean, I guess in some ways he's like Harry Mudd or whatever. He's, that helps. It would have been nice if that actually. It's like I would rather have just had Lando show up a lot. And maybe create an arc why he works with the rebellion. Then you kind of find out why he wasn't sticking it out with the rebellion. And of course, then again, you'd have to explain like, well, why didn't when she heard the name Lando, why wouldn't Leia know who he was or something? But,
Right.
you know, I might make it too complex. But yeah, I mean, I feel like, yeah, all told, I think season 3 was pretty good. It was, in some ways, I felt like the Thrawn thing had been maybe oversold. You know, a lot of it, I feel like a lot of the work that is done kind of maybe coasting on his reputation as a character for people that have, but then again, I talk to people all the time and they go, oh, I never even read any of those books, you know, and these are like fans. So it's not, you know, maybe those books are not as big a deal to everyone as they were to, like, say, me, because it's like that was kind of like, you know, post high school, getting back, you know, I hadn't thought about Star Wars in 4 or 5 years, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know, I'll read that, and all of a sudden I'm back into it. So those Zahn books were important to me, but maybe not to everybody. It's kind of, so maybe they aren't the tracks that you're supposed to like, oh, well, he's not exactly the same. I mean, I'd even said, like, how come, you know, why didn't they have him write because, like, one of the things he had said at that talk, Timothy Zahn had said at the Comic-Con, is that they, you know, they own that character. They could have completely brought him back and not even said anything, and he could have just been like on Twitter one day and somebody had said, hey, I see Thrawn's back, and he'd be like, what? I mean, they actually brought him in to, like, do this tie-in novel, which I guess comes out in 2 weeks.
Something like
that in April. And it's like, oh, like,
April 11th, I believe.
Why didn't they ask him to write the episodes? But then I realized, like, he kind of, he set the tone for them. He doesn't need to write the episodes. They kind of know. Mm-hmm. I mean, and
I think he's also said he had, like, a long meeting with the Lucasfilm people.
Yeah.
And, you know, Filoni may have been part of those. Who knows? Or I think he was, actually. Yeah, I mean, overall, I liked this season. You know, it was kind of scattered, I think. Like, there were a lot of threads going on, right, that about Thrawn and about Maul and about, you know, Ezra and Sabine, and we kind of, I think I like the way it ended up, and it was I feel like the finale was a very satisfying resolution for the episodes to which it was relevant, right, for all those threads it tied together. But looking back, I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here that just isn't related at all. And that's fine. I mean, that's fine, right? You're making however many episodes you're making, 20 or whatever. You're going to have stuff like that. Just like, oh, I just want to tell a self-contained story in here, and let's do that. I mean, I do think it'll be interesting, speaking of Thrawn, to see whether there are any repercussions for the fact that basically they all got away. I mean, certainly he kind of flushed them out of their base. They won't be going back there. He prevented, you could argue, that, you know, the attack on Lothal. But, you know, Tarkin wanted him to capture the rebel leadership, and he didn't get any of them. And in fact, you know, Fulcrum escaped from his you know, Star Destroyer. So are there any repercussions with Tarkin? Does he get demoted? Does he get put on probation? Does he get sent back out to the disputed zone? I can't remember the name of
corporate sector.
Yeah. You know, probably not any of those things, but, you know, he could be on notice, and, you know, maybe that puts him in a slightly awkward position, and he has to think differently and strategize differently. I mean, I don't know. I'll be kind of interested to see where his status within the Empire now, and whether his reputation has taken a hit because he let them get away, or if he's just able to blame Constantine and say, like, well, it would have worked if these underlings you gave me, you know, were able to follow my orders, but he didn't, and that's why we lost an interdictor, and that led to everything else.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because, again, I think Filoni had kind of mentioned that he was waiting for Rogue One to come out before they were going to integrate some ideas into Rebels, and and I think that feeds into it, because in some ways it'll kind of inform a little bit of the relationship between, say, Orson Krennic and and Tarkin, even though it's explained a lot in the Catalyst book. But I mean, as far as the cartoons, it's the idea that maybe, Tarkin won't be so enamored with Thrawn, and the idea that like it kind of plays into this thing where it's like, he's already, by the time Rogue One happens, it's like he's already had to deal with Thrawn, with the showboat. So in some ways, Krennic is just another showboat, and it kind of plays into the idea that, like, when he quote pacifies Scarif at the end of the movie, he's just like, I'm just tired of dealing with these guys. I'm just going to blow up the planet or whatever, because it'll be, I think it'll be an interesting kind of way. It's like, and getting into like maybe some speculation about season 4, it's. When that prophecy thing about like, what did he say hands, or did he say small hands around him? I think it was just hands, cold hands. Yeah. Something like that. I'm wondering if
hands surrounding you in a cold embrace.
I wonder if then they're going to maybe try to bring in the Nogri or something. Which might be interesting into season 4. I mean, I'm almost guaranteed now that Dantooine is going to be probably their next base.
Maybe. I mean, I thought they really said something about Yavin, but it could be that, they have both. They have the Yavin base and the Dantooine base.
Yeah, I think the Yavin base is like they've been there for a while, and that's the different cells or whatever. But I mean, I only say that because I find out that Dantooine was they were supposed to start Rogue One on Dantooine and then have to move to Yavin, and it was just a money thing basically.
Yeah,
they decided
we don't want to have to build 2 rebel base sets.
Which I assume now, because they had to refilm a bunch of it, that was smart money. But I mean, at least that's what I would hope. But yeah, I think there's going to be hope. If it would be more interesting for Thrawn to maybe be knocked down a peg, which would be a new thing for him, because he never in the books, the old books, the trilogy, he never had to answer to anybody really. He had the Pelion, which was his second. And then, I mean, there was no one higher in the Empire than Thrawn at that stage. So in some ways, it would be interesting to see how a master, what do you call? I can't even think of the word. I'm blanking. But anyway, how a guy who really was on his game deals with failure. Does he? Right. And I also, again, going back to the episode, I really liked that little idea that he figured out where that planet was like, oh, well, it's not on the maps, but it's in the art. I actually thought that was one of the few times that they were able to properly integrate this kind of almost omniscient thing that Thrawn has in the books, where it's like you can go, they were connected just long enough for 3 people to go from one ship to the other. And I always felt that was like a little like, that's almost getting kind of silly. But this idea where it's like, well, it's not in the record. And again, I'm sure it's a nod to the concept brought up in Attack of the Clones when I guess Darth Sidious or whatever, somebody removed Kamino from the star charts or whatever. Right. That this is a thing that can happen. I mean, people can't hide planets. It's like, again, Star Wars is one of those things where they're obviously technologically advanced. They can travel faster than light or whatever. But then there's like these weird like gaps of like, okay, we can travel fast and light, but I have to literally take a thing that looks like a garden hose and hook it up from my shuttle to a post and flip a switch and all this stuff. But I mean, I think that's what's charming about Star Wars is the fact that, yes, they've answered the big questions about how to get around in space, but they still you don't know if they have toilets, until one episode.
It's not a thing where like you need it explained.
Right.
And in the Phantom Menace, one of those, little webisodes or whatever, Doug Chang was talking about their undersea boat submarine that they had on Naboo.
Oh yeah.
And how George Lucas was basically telling them like, look, don't worry about how it's powered. Like just make it go. You don't have to worry about what the power source is or anything like that. Just design a thing. And that was true of the original trilogy as well to a certain extent. I mean, you saw like engines or the exhaust or for the Star Destroyers, and you saw the engines for the X-wing and the Y-wings, but you never asked like, oh, so is that like the nuclear powered, or is that
Right.
some kind of new carbon based fuel that they found, or gas, or what is that exactly? You just kind of said like, all right, this ship goes somehow.
Yeah, I mean, those are the questions.
They can travel to light speed somehow, but we don't need the science behind how they can travel at the light speed.
Right, and that's more of I mean, that always falls under the role of the role playing game or whatever, the West End games,
Right.
where it's some books will some books are like, oh, you have to charge your lightsaber, and some books say that they have the crystal inside them provides the power. So it's like it's always. I like that. I actually kind of am all right with that. It's rather than Star Wars would never work would be so boring as hard sci-fi. I like the little inconsistencies occasionally. It's fun.
Yeah. The last thing I want to mention about what Filoni suggested, or you can kind of connect the dots between what he said and what we saw in this season is that we'll see a little bit more Mon Mothma, not like a ton, but we're also going to see more Saw Gerrera in season 4. And so I wonder if another thread that they'll take up is, he kind of mentioned, this we'll get a little more inside information about the split between Mon Mothma and Saw Gerrera, and his extreme methods versus her more cautious political maneuvering. But I could also see this revolving around kind of Saw Gerrera's obsession with figuring out what it was that wiped out his team on Geonosis, and what that symbol that I can't remember his name, Click Clack on Geonosis. So basically figuring out, learning of the existence of the Star Destroyer, and in Rogue One you had Cassian Andor. And it referred to like, oh, he's heard rumors, or maybe I can't remember if it was in the movie or if it was just in the Rogue One novelization. But he'd heard kind of like rumors. There were like puzzle pieces that terms and things he had heard about some kind of weapon and what it was, and so maybe we'll see a little more of that. Maybe we'll meet Cassian Andor in season 4, and as a young intelligence officer. Maybe we'll meet, I can't remember the general's name that he worked for maybe not general, whoever he worked for in Rogue One, the guy who told him to kill
Draven.
Mikkelsen.
Draven.
Yeah.
Draven.
Yeah.
Draven.
So thank you. So maybe we'll see him in season 4.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I think there are a lot of different ways they could take this. That could, make it a really interesting Star Wars show.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of like the world is their oyster as far as what they want to tell. They've got great tapestry to pick from right now, and they haven't what's the name of the one that I really Iron Squadron notwithstanding.
That episode.
Or my not being so excited about the way that Obi-Wan was dispatched, whatever. But I mean, I think I complained a lot about it. But I mean, I think they're doing. I'm sorry, phone call. I think they did a pretty good job. It's. I was wondering. Actually, sorry, this phone thing is just distracting me. I was wondering. I kind of mentioned. I know you were pretty busy last night. Did you get a chance to come up with any ideas of recasting Rogue One, or should we table that?
Why don't we put that off for another week?
Absolutely,
because I think I did think of them, and I can't remember what. So
I'll open this up to listeners, and maybe this might be fun.
Yeah.
In closing, I've been watching Rogue One a lot, and for some reason, I keep thinking like the first 2/3 of this movie, up till about around the Edu battle, it has a very 70s feel to me. Actually, like it kind of all the special effects notwithstanding or whatever, it's obviously 2017 level, but it made me think like, if this movie had actually been the first Star Wars movie, like it's like a thing where that's because it could have been. It has a self-contained story, even though like a lot of the Vader stuff would probably be really confusing to people. But then again, if you just present it that he's a bad guy, it might not be. He seems you can tell pretty quickly that when Darth Vader shows up, he's a bad guy. So it's not like a thing they need to explain it to you. But it made me think like, well, what if they had made this movie, say, in 1975? Who would be in it? And of course, you could still have James Earl Jones because he was still acting around that. He was,
use that
still
voice.
have Peter Cushing. You could actually have the live Peter Cushing. But anyway, I will posit this and I would say, like, I'll give you an example. Like, I actually thought, because it would have been the 70s and, they still do this to this day in a little bit of in kind of a whitewashing, but like Cassian Andor, like played by Michael York from Logan's Run or the Three Musketeers. I just think that they'd dye his hair black and he'd be, I'm Cassian Andor. He'd play it as an English dude, but he'd try to, he'd have black hair and maybe glue on mustache, or like Saw Gerrera would be played like by Paul Winfield, which people might know him from Wrath of Khan. He's one of the guys that gets the things in his arm. He's obviously did a million things. But anyway, I was thinking about like, maybe Mon Mothma would be played by Charlotte Rampling. People, that kind of stuff. So, a little homework for people who want, maybe you could email us at hosts@talkingbirdcast.com. Like if you were going to recast a 1975 version of Rogue One, who would you have in those roles? I kind of spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I'll be perfectly honest. I go way too obscure, which is always a problem with me because I'm always making way too obscure references.
I don't think Michael York's that obscure.
No, that's my point. It's like I was like,
that was your concession.
That's my concession because I was like, I think that Saw Gerrera actually. Before I was telling people, like, I was like, I think, I kept thinking of Sterling Hayden as Saw Gerrera. And then, like, people are like, who? Like, from Doctor Strangelove? And it's just like, and I realized it's like, yeah, okay, I'm being too obscure here. So, you don't need to be obscure. You don't need to be a Robert about it. You can.
Well, and I'll add this. Who do you think would direct Rogue One?
Oh, that's a good one.
Circa 1974.
I'm going to leave that one blank, because I'm going to think about that, and I actually want to hear from listeners.
For our listeners, who do you think would direct it?
And well, John, you have homework too, so you didn't come up with anything.
Yes, I know. It's on my list.
So anyway, think about it. Voice of K2SO.
Chirrut and Baze.
How would you do Chirrut and Baze? In the 70s, if you think about like the way the way movies are kind of were, it's like would it be two Chinese actors? Would it be somebody completely different? I mean, it's that kind of thing. It's like kind of the world is your oyster. It's just, I think it'd be a fun exercise, not a reflection on the casting of Rogue One, which I think was fantastic, but it's just, it's something fun to do. And again, hosts at talkingbirdcast.com. It's also a good way to just get a hold of us in general. We also have a Twitter at talkingbirdcast. We have a website at www.talkingbirdcast.com. And most importantly, especially if you're tempted by my loving appreciation of the Ralph McQuarrie book, we have an Amazon affiliate link that I would love for you to use. If you're an Amazon shopper, what you do is you go to www.talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon, and it's like a pass through. It takes you right to Amazon. But what happens is that Amazon kicks back a percentage of the sale to us. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it helps pay for the show, and we always appreciate it when you do. Did you have anything to add, John?
No. I'm looking forward to hearing everyone's ideas for casting the 1974 classic Rogue One.
Absolutely. So, I will thank you for listening, and for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
Have a good week, and may the Force be with you.